Welcome in to the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Bradley Stalder. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder, and this is episode 26. In episode 25, I did live projections for the Arizona Cardinals. You can find that live stream and video on YouTube, and also find the podcast audio version wherever you listen to your podcasts: iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Make sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel Best Bell Fantasy, and also give the 5-star ratings on the YouTube and, of course, on all the podcast formats. Check those out. Really appreciate your support. It allows me to continue to pump out content like this. Tonight, I'll be doing projections for the Atlanta Falcons. And just like the Arizona Cardinals, I'll be going through player by player what their median projections would be. And then at the end of this time, I'll go through and compare them to where they would rank compared to last year in a half-point format. What kind of wide receiver, what kind of quarterback are we looking at on a points per game basis or total points? And from there, we can get a gauge as to, is this player someone that we can be targeting or overvaluing, undervaluing, etc.? And I'll give a spoiler alert. I haven't even started the projections for Atlanta, but there aren't going to be a lot of fantasy relevant players for the Atlanta Falcons. Nevertheless, let's jump right on in. The only way to find out is to do it. So let's do this live. As I mentioned on the first run through of the median projections for the Arizona Cardinals, the biggest part of understanding projections is that it's one way in which we can view players. And each of those players have a certain distribution of a certain cut of the pie, if you will. There's a certain target share and a certain rush share. And as you'll see here, I've already started to put in some shares of the pass attempts for the quarterback. So as you can tell, the total pass attempts for Marcus Mariota is going to be, I expect him to play about 11 games. I expect Desmond Ridder to play 5 games and Felipe Franks to get a game in there. We'll go from there. As I said, I have not filled this all out. I will be doing that live on the live stream here. The Atlanta Falcons didn't have a lot of changes on their coaching staff, so I don't anticipate a lot of shifts from a play calling perspective. They also downgraded and upgraded, if you want to think about it that way, weapons. They lost Calvin Ridley for the whole season, and they brought in Drake London, but they lost Russell Gage. They do have Kyle Pitts. They signed Damian Williams. They drafted Tyler Algier. They re-signed Cordarrelle Patterson. But I am concerned about the upside that this team will have going into 2022. But let's look at the team rankings from 2021 and get a feel for it. The Falcons traded away Matt Ryan and signed Marcus Mariota instead. And last season, the Atlanta Falcons, even under Matt Ryan, ran the second fewest plays per game, 59.2. And in fact, in their last game of the season, 47.7 plays. Over the last 3, I'm sorry. The average over the last 3 was 47.7. Their last game was 48. That's compared to 2020, where the Atlanta Falcons were 4th among all teams in plays per game. That's the difference of having a useful Julio Jones, a healthy and available Calvin Ridley, and Matt Ryan. A faster paced team compared to and an older, different coaching staff. Now you have a slower coaching staff, less explosive plays, shorter drives. There are concerns about the Atlanta Falcons replicating really any fantasy goodness in 2020. Let's look. I anticipate it could be even lower than 59.2. It could be closer to where Seattle was last year at 56, 57. I might even put it at 57 plays per game. I don't think this offense is going to be very good. It's going to be negative game scripts, but I don't think that the quarterbacks like Mariota and Desmond Ridder are going to be able to extend drives the way Matt Ryan could last year. That leaves 523 pass attempts if we split it up a 54-46 split. Let's look at the splits from last year and the year before for Atlanta. The Atlanta Falcons were 8th in pass rate in 2021 and were 8th as well in 2020. So I anticipate they will be still passing, even though they don't have Matt Ryan, but they will have more negative game scripts. So I still think they're going to be passing, what was it, 54%? I think that's going to be higher than that. So let's bump up the pass percentage here to 60, let's say 60% pass rate. Okay. And that gets 581 pass attempts, 388 rush attempts. Cool. Now we can start getting into the players. We can start looking at Marcus Mariota. Now, Marcus Mariota has not been a starter for quite some time. In fact, let's go all the way back to 2019 when Marcus Mariota was the starter for part of the year for Tennessee, right? That was in 2019, the year that Ryan Tannehill took over for Marcus Mariota. And ever since then, Mariota has ridden the bench either on the Tennessee Titans or the Las Vegas Raiders. And he's been sparingly used in 2020 and 2021. In fact, he's only had 18 completions over the course of 30 pass attempts during his 16 or his 11 games that he's played with the Vegas Raiders over the last 2 years. Looking at his time in Tennessee, his completion percentage ranged from 59.4 all the way to 62.2. His career, he had one season in 2018 where he had 68.9, but his career rate is 62.8. And I think a 63% completion percentage is going to be what we want here. And just like before, the completion percentage is going to be, I want it to be 63 or so percent. And that's what I don't want the sum. I want this equal to this number divided by this number. Okay. And that I want as a percentage. So that way we can get the targets and percents and all that. Okay. Squared away. So I don't know why that's not showing up, but let's say equals this number as 32. Enter. Okay, so 3%, that's not going to be correct, but that's okay. All right. So looking at how it's split up, 581 pass attempts, 388 rush attempts. That's what I'll expect from these Atlanta Falcons as a team. So from there, the pot's going to get split up and we'll start filling in these completions and completion percentage as we get more information. Marcus Mariota's career interception rate is 2.5%. And during his time in Tennessee, it ranged from 2% to 3.3%. So I think a good median there would be about 2.5 or 2.6%. So equals 2.6% times the amount of pass attempts. Okay. So I would expect 10 interceptions, which would be tying his rookie season when he started 12 games and had 370 attempts, 230 completions, a 62.2% completion percentage. Now let's look at the rushing for Marcus Mariota, because that may be where we see a little bit of fantasy relevance for Mariota. Okay. Looking at his 2019 rush shares in the 7 games he played in 2019, his median rush share was 11%. Looking at 2018, his median rush share was, wow, there was one game where he had 45.5% of the rushes, but his median rush share in 2018 was 15%. In 2017, his median rush share was, 14.3%. So I think 14% is going to be a fair rush share to assign to Marcus Mariota. So we're going to say K35. No, we want K33. and 54 rush attempts over the course of the season. His career yards per carry is 6 yards per carry. And looking over the majority of his career in Tennessee, it was ranged between 5.2 and 5.8. So I think that 5.5 would be a fair yards per carry for Mariota. That would give him 298 rushing yards on the season and a touchdown rate. So looking at his career, Mariota has 13 career rushing touchdowns in 264. So equals 18 divided by 264. That should be about a 5% rate. 4.92. That's fine. I think that is a fair number to use. And that gives him about 3 rushing touchdowns over the course of the season. Now, I don't know exactly what to peg Desmond Ridder for, but let's look at Ritter's college stats and see if we can maybe downgrade him a little bit from there. Desmond Ridder, probably going to be pretty accurate. His career completion percentage, 65% in 2021 at Cincinnati, 66.2%. So probably going to be close to 65 is my guess. Maybe dock him down 1% for being in the NFL, but let's say 64, 63%. So let's do that. 63%. And we'll drop that down. 108 completions. And we don't have the number yet, but let's see here. To get Desmond Ritter's yards per attempt, I think it'll be safe to assume that it's not going to be like very high. It's not going to be like 9 or 10 or anything like that. But his yards per attempt at Cincinnati was 8.6 in 2021, 8.2 in 2020, 6.7 in 2019. Let's be conservative here. Give him 6.7 yards per attempt passing. So let's do that. 6.7 times the amount of attempts. Okay. And then Felipe Franks, we'll talk about him in a little bit. Okay. A fair touchdown rate. I wouldn't really know like too well of the touchdown rate, but looking at like Mariota's, for instance, 4.3 was Mariota's touchdown rate, 3.3. So it should range between 3 and 5. So let's give Desmond Ridder a 4% equals 4% touchdown rate times this, and that would give him 7 passing touchdowns. And let's say he does make mistakes, equals 3% interception rate, a 7 and 5 his first year, and a rushing share. Let's say that is, let's look at his rushing yards. He ran for 355 yards in 14 games in Cincinnati his senior year, 592 rushing yards in 10 games for Cincinnati in 2020, almost 60 yards per game rushing. I think a rush rate for Desmond Ridder can be comparable to the rush share for Mariota. Now, that's a 14% rush share, but I think we have to prorate that rush share. So equals 11 divided by 17, multiply by 14%. And I said that he's going to do this for 5 games, Desmond Ridder. So let's do 14% again, prorated, but over 11 or over 5 games, 517 multiplied by 14%. Okay, so 4.12 rushing share for Desmond Ridder. I think that's fine. Yards per carry similar to Mariota. I wouldn't be surprised if they do similar things on the ground. So 1 rushing touchdown, 7 passing touchdowns for Ridder. Okay, and minus this number as well. Okay. So that'll fill in. Good. And then Felipe Franks. Now, Felipe Franks really didn't get much work in 2021. He was a rookie in 2021, working behind Matt Ryan. Didn't get much at all. In fact, only 2 games where he registered a rush share and maxed out at a 9.4 snap share against Carolina week 8. So he's probably not going to get very much. Like, I'm banking one game of Felipe Franks over the course of the season. We'll see if he even makes the team. Obviously, once we get closer to the season, we can start cutting out players and filling in the rest of the projections. But it's June 20th. We're not close to the end of August yet. We're going to move that down here. And this number is going to be also minus this number as well. Okay. And there we go. We'll have 1 touchdown, 1 reception. And I said this is going to be 1, so equals 1 divided by 17, multiplied by 14%. Yeah, not much for Felipe Franks. Okay. I project him for 0.157 or 157 thousandths of a rushing touchdown this year. LOL. Okay, now we can move on to the position players. And we'll look at what Mariota's stats will be later on as I fill in some of these players, but the wide receiver efficiency and receiving efficiencies are going to play a pretty significant role in how it affects Mariota. Okay, so let's take I'm going to delete this column here. Great. Let's get to Damian Williams. And let's look how Damian Williams did just last year. Damian Williams was on the Chicago Bears coming off of COVID respite year, if you want to look at it that way. When he was on Chicago last season, Damian Williams played 12 games and his median rush share was 5.75% rushes. There's one game he maxed out at 43.2, but 4 of his 12 games were a 0. So I think giving him 5.5% rush share is probably going to be fair. It's not going to be a significant impact on Damian Williams here. So he's not going to command or require a significant amount of rushes on this Atlanta team. Okay. Very good. So looking at over the course of his career, Damian Williams, 2018, his yards per attempt, 5.1. His 2019 year in Kansas City, 4.5. His 2021 year, 4.1. His career average, 4.2. He started pretty poorly, now is about 4.1. So I would be comfortable putting 4.1 as his yards per carry. And then we'll see how many rushing yards that gives us, 87. His rushing touchdown rate, looking over his career, he has 14 career touchdowns in 334 rushes. So he goes 14 divided by 334. That's going to be pretty low. That's a 4.19%, which is lower than what I was projecting the quarterbacks at. So 1 touchdown on the year. That's not going to be too crazy. Okay. So there we go. We're going to move all of these up and pre-populate. I work my way down the projection so that way I know where I've left off. And let me do that the rest of the way just so that for the formatting purposes later on, it's easier. Yeah, there are a lot of throw a dart and see who hits for the Atlanta Falcons. Let's be honest here. It's going to get pretty disgusting very quickly and might be a little tedious. I apologize in advance if that is the case. But we're looking at Damian Williams and his target share last season. Actually pretty interesting. So I told you he had 12 games and his median was about 4.5% of the targets. But there were 5 of his 12 games, where he had a 10.9% target share or higher. So maybe it's not fair to look at it from that perspective. If he's going to be starting or at least getting significant snaps, like weeks 1 and 2 of last season, 12 and 13% of the targets, weeks 4 and 5, 11 and 15. And then he gotten injured for a little bit during the season and finished even with week 18 at 10.9%. So I haven't heard anything other than that. Let's see if the mean would be a better way of gauging it, because it's very clear cut that is he going to get a 10% target share, or is it going to be more like 4%? So 28, 40, 52, 63, 78. So almost 7% target share. I think then a 6% target share, 6.4, what I have there should be fair. 37 targets, 19 receptions, but we need to adjust the catch percentage, the catch rate. Okay. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. And Damian Williams, over the course of his career, has been a pretty good receiving back. 77.4 is this career. Last season was at about 70%. So I could say that maybe 73% is his catch rate. So 73%, 27 receptions there. Then his yards per target, looking over his career, yards per target, 6.1 is his career rate. The last two seasons, though, 5.8 and 4.5. That should take you to about 5.2 yards per target, which is lower than his career, but he's older and probably not as dynamic. So 5.2 is probably fair. His receiving touchdown rate, 11 career receiving touchdowns for Damian Williams, 199 targets. So equals 11 divided by 199. Let's see. 2 receiving touchdowns given a 6% target share, because that's 5.53% receiving touchdown rate. Okay. So we've got some Damian Williams. His half point PPR total points, looking at running backs last year, he total, based on where we have him just right now, I haven't done the adjustments yet, 59 would not even get you in the top 50. So Damian Williams, not a consideration in the top 50. And I don't think he has he is more of like a satellite back. Maybe if Cordero Patterson goes down, Damian Williams can take on some of the pass catching role. But I don't see, like, if Tyler Algier goes down, I don't see Damian Williams taking on a 15 carries per game load. He would be interesting in full PPR more than a half PPR. Next, we'll look at Quadre Ollison. Okay. Ollison, he was a goal line back near the beginning of his career, but was seldom used last season. In fact, didn't get any run until week 9. And then in week 9, he started getting a little bit of run. In week 11, he had 56.3% of the rushes. But looking over his 7 games, his median rush share was 8.7%. Quadre Ollison, yeah, a goal line back. Quadre Ollison. I mean, he had 4 rushing touchdowns in 8 games in 2019 and another rushing touchdown on 21 attempts. So he has 5 career rushing touchdowns in 44 attempts. So close goal line back. He's 6'1", 232, big dude, but just not very efficient. So when I'm talking about the rush share, let me look at maybe what 2019 had him at, because right now I'm tempted to put him at 7% of the rushes as like goal line. But in 8 games in 2019, he was, about 8% of the rushes. So let's start at 8, and I'm not afraid to move that down if that's the case. His career yards per carry, Quadre Ollison, rookie year was 2.3. Last year in 2020, 1 rush, 3 yards, but 5 yards per attempt in 2021. You wonder if him being on the field with Cordero Patterson could open things up. I think a career 3.6 is probably the best bet to be accurate here. So there we go. Rushing yards, 112. His rushing touchdown rate, he had 5 over 44. It was 5 divided by 44. Okay, that is going to be pretty high. 11.36. I think it's going to be lower than that. So let's cut that in half. 1.72, maybe 2 touchdowns this coming year. But I'm willing to move that down. Quadri Allison is one of those placeholder backs that I don't mind dropping down. You want to be able to have that flexibility in these projections. That's the art of this, is having a baseline for each of the players and then being able to adjust and say, you know what, this makes more sense in the context, or based on later on how I see the whole pie, I need to shrink it. And he's one of those players that I can afford to shrink. I don't anticipate that his role is going to be safe if one of the other players comes along and is useful. Okay, let's look at the target share. Quadri Allison, his median target share was 2.5% in 2021. And in 2019, Quadri Allison's median target share was 0. So I think a 2% target share is more than generous for Quadri Allison. That's probably maybe even a 1% would be more than fair. And Quadri Allison's catch percentage, career 62.5%. So we'll put that 62.5%. His yards per target, 2.4. Probably going to be closer to 3. So let's put him at 3. 17 receiving yards, no receiving touchdowns. That's 0. And Quadri Allison will project even lower than Damian Williams, given the lack of targets. And even though he may be used more at the goal line, not a player you should be targeting. Let's move on to more interesting wide receiver running back hybrid. Cordero Patterson had one of the biggest breakouts last season. When you were listening to the coaches and them speaking in the offseason, the first running back that was mentioned by the new coaching staff and Arthur Smith was Cordero Patterson. Or at least like when he was asked about, oh, what running backs do you have? Who's going to take over? Is it going to be Mike Davis? Is it going to be this other player? Because remember, it was Mike Davis season. Like he was coming off a huge season in Carolina. Billy Muzio and I had gotten into a debate over whether Mike Davis was a well-priced running back. I think it was in the 5th round. And I argued no, Mike Davis was not good. And he argued, yes, Mike Davis is a good pick there. But it was Mike Davis season, if you remember a year ago. But Arthur Smith was asked, is it going to be Mike Davis? And his reply was, yeah, but we also have Cordero Patterson. And I think Patterson, I don't know if he'll be able to replicate what he did last season, but it's certainly interesting that the team went out of their way to bring him in and re-sign him, and then will be using him in a lot of different ways, not just as a running back. And this is where the intrigue comes in. I want to see how his rush share and target share will line up for me. Over the course of 16 games, Cordero Patterson's median rush share was 39.9%. So let's put 39.9% of the rushes. That gives him 155 rush attempts. That's slightly lower. If you remember yesterday's live stream, that's slightly lower than James Conner. That's wild to me. But you also have to remember that this is a team who's not going to be a fast-paced team. They're also not going to run a lot of plays. And 39% on the Atlanta Falcons is not going to be the same as 39% or 42% on the Arizona Cardinals. Cordero Patterson, 39.9% rush share is the median. He ranged from 16% all the way to 63%. So putting him at about 40 is the right spot, I think. And then the median target share, 12.65%. So 12.65% was the median target share. Now, the catch percentage, we didn't even do yards per carry for Cordero Patterson. So let's finish his rushing stats. I was getting a little ahead of myself. I was getting excited. Cordero Patterson, his yards per carry over his career, and he's 31 years old, Super Bowl champion, 4-time All-Pro, 4-time Pro Bowler. His yards per carry rushing over his career, 5.1, but last year was only 4. The year before was only 3.6. I think 4 is a fair yards per carry. So let's put in 4. Okay. So 619 rushing yards, assuming over 17 games. His rushing touchdown rate. Cordero Patterson has 14 career rushing touchdowns over the course of 320 rush attempts. And that puts him at a 4.38% rushing touchdown rate, 7 rushing touchdowns over the course of 17 games, if that's still going to hold up. And then we can move to, I've already put in the target share, and now we've got targets. And his catch percentage over the last 2 seasons, 84% and 75.4%. His career, 67.5%. I think Marcus Mariota will look for him close to the line of scrimmage. He's not going to run the deep routes like Kyle Pitts or Drake London. So I think a 75% catch rate is just fine. And then his yards per target. Career 6.6, last 2 seasons 5.3 and 7.9. So I think that a 6.6 is probably going to be the fair median or so, fair average, fair median for Cordero Patterson. That gives him 485 receiving yards, receiving touchdown rate. So let's look at his receiving touchdowns. He has 15 career receiving touchdowns in 309, 15 divided by 397. So that gives him a 3.78 receiving touchdown rate, or over the course of the season, 3 receiving touchdowns. So I project Cordero Patterson should approach 10 total touchdowns, 7 on the ground, 3 receiving, 195.25 half PPR points. And where does 195 post? That's running back 15 if he plays all 17 games last season compared to the running backs total points last season. So I think his ceiling is still a back end running back 2 if he can get 70+% of, or 70 plus targets at a 13% clip, and also 40% of the rushes. Okay. Now here's the wild card. Tyler Algier. It's difficult to project rookies, especially a player like Tyler Algier, who is a 5th-round pick out of BYU, 22 years old. He had a 10% career, 10% college target share his last season at BYU. He had 28 receptions on 39 targets, over 1,600 rushing yards, 276 attempts. Each of the last 2 seasons, over 150 attempts. I like seeing running backs who can carry the load for more than 1 season, and Tyler Algier did do that. This is the one that I'm probably going to massage the most. Let's put him at a 30% share, rush share, just to see. And 4 yards per carry clip, 465 yards. And let's say that he does get similar goal line work. So let's say like 4.75%, maybe a little bit higher. Okay, no, I want 4.75%. Okay, so that would give him 5 touchdowns on the year. Not too bad, 5 or 6 touchdowns on the year. I don't know if I'm going to give him more than about a 4% target share. Let's give him 70% catch rate, yards per target, like 5.5 or so. I don't anticipate him being used down the field like crazy. Receiving touchdown rate, maybe he gets 1 receiving touchdown. Okay, 105 half PPR points would put him at about running back 44, running back 45. If he can get 30% rush share, a 4% target share. These are, of course, as I said, baseline rough projections, but a back end running back 4 for Tyler Algier for right now. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but let's look maybe on Underdog. You can give us a barometer of how far off running back wise Algier is going as running back 47. So not too far off. If my median projections have him as in the 40s, That shouldn't be too bad. And I think that's where the consensus of ADP drafters are having him in half point. Okay. So I feel better about that. He may get some rushing work and pretty significantly. Okay, the next running back I'll take a look at very briefly is Avery Williams. Avery Williams, I think, switched positions. He was a cornerback for Atlanta last season and also return player as well. I don't think he gets a lot of rushing at all, maybe like a 1 or 2% share, 4 yards per carry, fine. Maybe they sprinkle him in too. Sure. Let's give him 8 rushes just for the heck of it. Rushing touchdown rate, 5%. He doesn't even get a touchdown on the year. That's fine. Avery Williams, maybe a 2% share, 70% catch rate, 6 yards per target is fine. 3.78 is also fine. Less than a receiving touchdown as well. Not a meaningful piece here for the Atlanta backfield. Caleb Huntley didn't play at all last season. So let's give him a 2% share, 4 yards per carry, 31. Boom, boom, boom. Almost nothing once again. Okay, cool beans. And then the last player that I'm interested in getting some rushing numbers for, yes, and Caleb Huntley, I don't think is going to get, yeah, he's a 0% target share. Keith Smith, okay, the fullback, who I did list as a running back on here, but here we are. Keith Smith has been on the Atlanta Falcons for the last 3 seasons. He played previously in Dallas and for the Vegas Raiders, but he's got some work in over the course of the last few seasons. He's used sometimes in a Keith Smith program decides to load. There we go. In 2021, Keith Smith, he played all the games and his median was 0, but in games that he would hit, 30, 41, 50, 60, 65 over the course of 16 games. So a 4% share on average is receiving wise anyways, but I counted that wrong. That should be more like 13, 14, 21, 30 over the course of, so 2% target share. And Keith Smith, the rushing share, also not super involved. 24, 42 over the course of 16 games, 17 games, like 2.5% of the rushes. Sure. And then his rushing touchdown rate over his career, not very high at all, because he has no career rushing touchdowns and no career receiving touchdowns. So maybe I'll project him to just get the bare minimum here, but that's not going to really move the needle. Keith Smith, 14 fantasy points in half PPR over the course of the season. Not going to do it. Same thing with John Rain, tight end, virtually a 0, leaving him be. Let's get into the wide receivers. It's about time. We dawdled enough with the wide receivers or with the running backs. Now we get into the wide receivers. So let's go to the wide receivers. And the first one is Carterell Hodge, who previously played on the Detroit Lions and had no rushing stats, but his target share, his median target share over the course of 16 games was 2.7% targets. So nothing crazy here. 16 targets, career catch percentage, Hodge, 52.6% of his career catching the ball, 52.6%. Yards per target, 7.5 is his career, so I can bump him down a little bit. Receiving yards is fine. Receiving touchdown rate, he has 0 touchdowns, and so I can pretty confidently just bop him down to 3.78. Yeah, Hodge is not going to be a useful piece for you in the Atlanta back or in the Atlanta wide receiver core. Probably want to try some other dart throws. Instead, let's look at an interesting wide receiver who flashed a little bit last season, and that is Demir Bird was on the Chicago Bears, and his median target share over the course of the season was 6.1%. So 6.1%. That puts him at 35 receptions on the season, or projected for Demir Bird. Who knows who's going to actually stick here? Is it going to be Hodge? Is it going to be Bird, Auden Tate, Batson? We think is it going to be Geronimo Allison? We think Olamide Zaccheaus and Brian Edwards and Drake London are going to be in Auden Tate. We just don't know. Last season, Demir Bird had 38 targets. So 35 targets again this year, 26 catches, but he has a career 64.6. Last season, his catch percentage was 68.4. So I think 64.6 is probably fair. His yards per target, 7.9 in his career. Last season, it was 8.7. Receiving yards, 280 is proper. Receiving touchdowns, he has 5 in his career over the course of 181. That's going to be pretty low. A 2.76% receiving touchdown rate. He's probably going to get 1 touchdown on the season. Once again, 45.3 half PPR fantasy points, not going to get it done. I'm going to wait on Drake London as a placeholder because I want to fill in the other parts and see what the need is. He's going to be the biggest stone, but we have uncertainty about what size stone that's going to be. So I'm going to work on the other pieces. I will come back to Drake London. Next, I'm going to work on Auden Tate. And Auden Tate has had an up and down career. We thought for a bit there was some upside. Auden Tate is 6'5", 228. He's a big dude. But after his 2019 season where he started 10 games and had 80 targets, it just tailed off. He couldn't stay healthy, couldn't stay on the field. And now the Cincinnati Bengals let him go. He's now on the Atlanta Falcons. So Auden Tate, let's look at his career in particular. The best sample size we have of Auden Tate is from the 2019 season. So hopefully we can get a feel for if he's given the full work, what does that look like? And Auden Tate, over the course of that season, when he got 80 targets, he got his median target share was about 17.5%. On a bad Cincinnati team with an injured AJ Green, and Tyler Boyd was the leading receiver that year. So 17% targets. That would get him to 99 targets, 61 receptions. But the bad news about Auden Tate is he has a career 51.7% catch rate. So 51.7%. And his yards per target, 6.8 in his career, 672 receiving yards. His touchdown rate, he only has 2 career touchdowns in 118 total targets. So that's a 1.69%, pretty low. We expect Auden Tate to only have about 2 touchdowns. Now let's look at Cameron Batson. Cameron Batson came into the league 2018. He's played on Tennessee over the last 3 seasons. He missed the 2019 season, only 29 career targets. So we can't anticipate he's going to be a player of meaningful impact. In fact, the biggest season he had was in 2020 for the Tennessee Titans. Couldn't really crack the team. Let's humor ourselves anyways and look up some Cameron Batson. Okay, in 2020, Batson's, if he ends up hitting, his median target share would be about 3.9%. So 3.9% is at least going to help me in making these median projections work out. His career catch percentage, 75%, so not too bad. So 5.9% is the career. Yards per target, 6.8. So we'll bop that down. He has 2 career touchdowns equals 2 divided by, what did I say, 29. So if he's given 4% of the targets, a 6.9% receiving touchdown rate. He had 1 touchdown and 5 targets last year and 1 touchdown and 13 targets the year before. So obviously that rate will come back down, but maybe he's more of a touchdown maker. He's 5'8", 175 though, so maybe it's more that defenses lose track of Cameron Batts. Yeah, no, that's not going to be too good here. Bryan Edwards. This is where I'm interested in seeing where can Bryan Edwards figure in. He was traded from the Vegas Raiders over to the Atlanta Falcons, the former 3rd round pick. Honestly flopped. There's a lot of hype preseason for the likes of a Bryan Edwards. 4th quarter himself. Look, he got the majority of his fantasy points in the 4th quarter. Looking at last season, Bryan Edwards' median target share in 2021 was unimpressive. He played 16 games, so his median target share was 11.5% of the targets. 11.5% of the targets, and his catch rate last season was 57.6%. His catch percentage in his rookie season, 73.3. I think the 60.8 is a fair number at the career rate. His yards per target, 10.3. It was 12.9 his rookie year, 9.7. This could be another downfield threat complement. So there we go, 10.3, 689 receiving yards, a touchdown rate. He has 4 career touchdowns in 74 career games. That's a 5.41%. That's fine. That's a slightly above league average. So getting 3 or 4 touchdowns, that's not surprising. 110 half PPR points. Does that make it onto the wide receiver list? He is going to be just outside the top 50. So more of a mid-tier wide receiver 5. We can view Bryan Edwards. And where is he going on Underdog? Maybe we can consider Bryan Edwards a little bit more. Bryan Edwards going wide receiver 93 on Underdog. 209.8 is his ADP. If you're, I don't know, having week 17 come back around, maybe Bryan Edwards is a super cheap option. Just throwing that out there as a consideration for you Best Ball Mania 3 drafters. Okay, cool. Let's keep it rolling. There's a lot more projections to do. Stanley Berryhill. Actually, nope. We're going to give you 0%. Sorry, bud. Tyshawn James, we're going to give you 0%. Sorry, bud. Jared Bernhardt. Nope. Sorry, bud. Geronimo Allison. The Green Bay homer in me is all about giving Geronimo Allison some love, but we haven't seen Geronimo Allison do very much of anything since he took this season off for COVID purposes. Like he just like Damian Williams earlier that we were projecting. Geronimo Allison took off the 2020 season. He played 3 games in 2021 for the Detroit Lions. I almost called them the Detroit Tigers there. But Geronimo Allison, interestingly enough, played all over for the Green Bay Packers when he was on the Packers. He moved into the slot at times. He played outside. His yards per reception his rookie season and his 3rd season, 2016, 2018, 16.8 and 15.2. So he could be used in a downfield threat if that's the role that he somehow carves out. His yards per target, 7.1 career yards per target. I'm not comfortable giving him a 10% target share, but let's look at 2019 for Geronimo Allison. What is his median target share in his most recent season of actually making a team? That would be about 10%. I'm going to cut that down to about 2%. 2%, that's the Green Bay homer and me giving him 12 mercy targets. Okay. There we go. And I'll just drop down the touchdown rates there. It's not going to really make much of a difference at all for these touchdown rates. But the incumbent wide receiver that we saw a couple decent weeks from was Olamide Zaccheaus. Olamide Zaccheaus in 2021, median target share on a pretty mediocre Atlanta Falcons offense. We saw a few games where one game he had almost 26% of the targets, but his median target share was 8.9%. And so bumping that down 8.9%. Yeah, it's not pretty. Let's just say that. Olamide Zaccheaus, also not a very large player. Zaccheaus is 5'8", 193. So Batson and Zaccheaus pretty much the same, only Batson is a little lighter as well. So Zaccheaus, his career reception catch rate 60%, so I can bump that down. Come on. There we go, 60%. His yards per target, 8.8, so a little bit deeper. 455 receiving yards, that's not crazy. Receiving touchdowns, he has 5 career receiving touchdowns in 90 targets. So putting that as the percent 5.56. 3 touchdowns on the year, that's not crazy. He replicated that last season on 53 targets, and I project him for 52 targets. Not crazy at all. Okay. Yeah, I don't even know if Geronimo Allison deserves to get a receiving touchdown in there, but there's my love for the Packers showing through. Whoops. Kyle Pitts. Okay. Remember, I haven't done anything with Drake London yet, so Kyle Pitts is going to be the biggest rock, aside from Cordero Patterson, that I've put in the bucket. And I think Kyle Pitts does regress to the mean. So he was way below. He's one of only a few players to have one receiving touchdown with the amount of targets that he had. Looking at his target share, Kyle Pitts' median target share in 17 games was 22.2% of the targets. That projects out to 129 targets on the season. And Kyle Pitts, that projects out for probably going to be close to 1,000 yards. And that's interesting to me. He had 1,026 last season on a 61.8% catch rate. And his yards per target, 9.3. We assume that he's going to take a downfield roll, and 5.56. I think that's fair. I even skipped over Frank Darby. I probably should take a look at Frank Darby. Projecting Kyle Pitts for 7 touchdowns, I feel is a bit high, but here we are. 7 touchdowns, 1,200 receiving yards. That could be Kyle Pitts. I like it. I'm sure everyone else likes it as well if Kyle Pitts could do that. Okay. Yeah. Getting Kyle Pitts to 7 touchdowns instead of 1 would be massive for his fantasy value. In fact, looking at 202 half PPR points for tight end, let's take a look. In half point PPR, 202 would put him as the tight end 3. And on most drafts, we see Kyle Pitts as the tight end 3, going behind Mark Andrews and Kelsey, pretty clearly in the tier below them, and ahead of Waller, ahead of Kittle. So tight end 3, projections wise, that's working out for Kyle Pitts. I had been fading him lately, but he was one of my most drafted tight ends early on in the offseason. So I may be back in on the Kyle Pitts bandwagon. I was maybe too far put off by the Marcus Mariota deal. Okay. What's W34? W32. Now, this was one of my whiffs from last year. I had really hoped that the likes of Anthony Firkser would take a step forward. But now he does come back to Arthur Smith, who is his offensive coordinator in Tennessee. And the Firk daddy himself may carve out like a useful role, like how he had in Tennessee. He was catching passes, and maybe they run a lot of two tight end sets. They did last year with Hayden Hurst and Anthony Firkser in 2021. Like he had a target share. He played 15 games. His median target share was 7.4, but he had 7 of his 15 games with over a 10% target share. One game he had 19, and a couple other games 16.7. And in 2020, Anthony Firkser, his median target share was 9.3. So like we could project that Anthony Firkser, let's say we give him an 8% share, and then his yards per target, his catch percentage, all those will play a part in that. Firkser is not going to be a touchdown maker. That's just not what his career. He's been used in his career is 6'2", 246, maybe more of a blocking tight end, but he's still got some athleticism. So let's take a look. Career catch percentage for Anthony Firkser, 75.7%. His yards per target, 7.9. 367 receiving yards, receiving touchdown rate. Firkser has 5 career receiving touchdowns in 140 career targets. That is a percentage, 3.57. Let's even change that to what Kyle Pitts is. So 3.57, if Kyle Pitts' receiving touchdown rate is that low, and I mean, over 129 targets, getting 5 touchdowns is significantly higher than getting 1 touchdown. That would get Kyle Pitts in half PPR 187, still going to be the tight end 3. So even if he doesn't produce significant touchdowns, it's still going to matter for where he ranks. Like he's still going to be the tight end 3. All right, Fitzpatrick, he's a 0. Watson is a 0. Fisk is a 0. Lenius is a 0. Parker Hesse, we'll just humor ourselves because I don't think Hesse has any fantasy relevance at all. He played one season, 2021. He had 5 catches for 43 yards, 6 total targets. So maybe a 2% share there, and that's it. Okay, 83%. Here we go. And now I need to go back to Drake London because Drake London is 10%, and I feel like he's going to be closer to 18%. Let's look at some of the career stats for Drake London to give at least some sort of a baseline, because London was an absolute beast at USC. 82nd percentile college target share, 27.3%. He broke out at age 18, over 1,000 receiving yards in 8 games. He declared early he's not even 21 yet. He had 39 receptions and 567 receiving yards for USC as a freshman, a true freshman at 18 years old. Dude is an absolute baller. So I think an 18% target share is pretty conservative for Drake London. And then 62% catch rate, that's fine. 8.3 yards per target, that's probably fine. I think a 5.4% receiving touchdown rate is probably fine there. Okay. And There we go. Okay, cool. So let's see. Drake London ended up at a projection of 5.65. And now it comes down to the massaging of the rush shares and the target shares. Looking at the rush shares, that's going to be pretty easy to massage. It's only 3.9% over. And we can take one from there, 1.5, 1.5, and 2.25. And let's see if we're there. 101.65. Quadri Allison, 7.5. Damian Williams, a 5% share. And Cordero Patterson, let's say it's 39.5% share. We're now down to a quarter and just need to take 28.75. And we're at 100% for the rush share. Yay! We're there. We're going to delete that. Cool. Now let's get to the target share. This is going to be a little bit more difficult, but as I mentioned, some of the things we're going to have to take away. We are 32% over. So looking at who would probably get replaced here, most obviously is Auden Tate. He's probably going to go down to 10% share. We'll chip that away pretty significantly. Damian, let's look at the total positions, see what pops up. So 28% from the running back. Keith Smith, no, Avery Williams, like a 0.5% deal. Algier, probably a 2%. Damian Williams at a 5%. There we go. Down to 20. Over. And we're still at 23. We're going to have to take away a lot from the wide receivers. Probably a 2% share for Hodge, 5% share. Brian Edwards, probably 11. Batson, maybe a 2. Trey Wayne's just retired. That's live. Olamide Zacchaeus, probably a 7. Ferk Daddy, probably going to be closer to a 5% share, honestly. 21% for Kyle Pitts. If we're keeping Drake London at 18. Where are we at? We're at 10% over still. Yikes. Okay, Cordero Patterson probably going to go down to 12. And where does that get us for the running back? Still 23, 4%. Audrey Allison, 0.5%. 21%. That's fine. And then the tight end, I'm still at 28%. That would let's give 1% here. Still at 6% over. I need to chip away at Olamide Zacchaeus, 6.5%, 0.5% for Darby. Geronimo Allison's probably going to be a 0. Sorry. Demo. Edwards, 10.5%. Batson, 1.5%. Auden Tate, 9%. Keith Smith, 1.5%. 584 targets, and I needed 581, so I'm 3 total over. I'm really close. So this will be good, and then I'll look at some of the more relevant players and do those comparisons. Okay. Damian Williams, 3.75. Cordero Patterson, 11.5. See, did we get there? That is 580, and we need 581. So let me put a little bit back to Cordero Patterson, 11.7. Did we get it? We got it. All right, we got him. Now, are we at 63.8%? Yes, we are. Yards per target, good. Receiving yards, good. Receiving touchdowns, 24. So based on the yards, it's not U34. That is U32. Okay. It's a lot of yards. Yeah, I don't think Marcus Mariota is going to be passing for 300 yards. So we'll probably have to dock down some of the yards per target significantly. Maybe like 5, 3, 6, 5, 5, fine, 5, 7, 7, 7.5, 6.5, 9, 7.5. Adjusting the yards per target because the passing yards just seem so high for Marcus Mariota. I just don't think that's a fair number for him. Because it was projecting out to 290 passing yards per game, and I don't think that's the right amount. So 7.5, 7.8. Let's say that. Let's just put it at 8. 7.5. And then 7.5. So let's see, 28, 16 over 11 games. 256. That's probably closer to where we want to be with the explosive players like Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Probably can get some significant play there. So looking at, let's start with Marcus Mariota, 188.2 quarterback points. Looking at the quarterbacks from last season, 188.2 would put him at quarterback 25, and that would have been ahead of Tua Tagovailoa, ahead of Baker Mayfield, ahead of Daniel Jones, ahead of Sam Darnold, ahead of Davis Mills. Okay, so Mariota, 16 passing touchdowns, 10 picks, 64% completion percentage, and about 250 passing yards per game. Okay, let's look at Damian Williams is not going to be relevant. Quadri Allison is not going to be relevant. Cordero Patterson, 183 as his running back, half point PPR, 183 would put him at running back 18. I feel this is like a ceiling for Cordero Patterson, running back 18. But if he gets even under 40% of the rush attempts and 11 or 12% of the targets, this is a player who could get 9, 10 touchdowns total in this offense. Maybe he completely falls off, but yet again, Cordero Patterson was the running back 9 last year and played 16 games. So I am baking in him falling down, but maybe I need to be a little bit higher on Cordero Patterson, given his role on this team. Okay. So Tyler, and for what it's worth, Cordero Patterson, I think his ceiling is like running back 18, but where is he going on Underdog? He's going as the running back 30, ADP 95.9. So perhaps I need to be a little bit higher. We need to be a little higher on Cordero Patterson. Once I finish all of the projections and I've done all 32 teams, I will go through the projections rankings and compare them to ADPs by the time I get them done. That's going to be a whole other project. Here we go. Okay, so Tyler Algier, I have at 88.85. He's not going to be in the top 50, still a running back 5. I mentioned he's probably a good value, though, given the role that he may carve out. Drake London, okay, I'm spitballing here. I think an 18% target share, second on the team behind Kyle Pitts, is fine. I think a slower start for Drake London and not a good. I don't think Marcus Mariota is going to be the type to make Drake London a thing. I still think 6 touchdowns is within the range of outcomes for Drake London, and 18% target share is, I feel, conservative, but at the same time, he's still operating behind Kyle Pitts at 21%, 105 targets, and a team that's going to be behind, but also not run a lot of plays. That's, I think, the concern is that the Atlanta Falcons just don't have the volume you like right now for Drake London. So 144 half PPR points would be about wide receiver 33 from last season. And right now, Drake London is going as the wide receiver 34 on Underdog. So my projection seems to appropriately price Drake London's ADP at wide receiver 34. Okay. That actually makes me feel better that the points are working out at that spot. Okay. Now, Auden Tate is not going to really hit. Brian Edwards is not in the top 50 of wide receivers in my projection or where he would rank last season. Kyle Pitts, though, 159.12, I think, is the final number for tight end, and 159 would put him at tight end 5. I had to drop down a little bit everything, but tight end 5 with a conservative 4 touchdowns. If he gets up to 7, let's say that instead it's not 3.57 instead 5.56, that's 173. So he could range from the tight end 3 to the tight end 5 based on his touchdown rate. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And Anthony Ferkser is not going to play a significant role. He'll catch some passes and be an annoyance, but it's still going to be Kyle Pitts as the tight end 1. He's going to command the most targets. So this is the Atlanta Falcons. It's not going to be a pretty sight for 2022. There's some players on here that are you're going to draft, and maybe there's some value to be had. I think I've appropriately projected Drake London for about 145 half-point PPR points. Cordero Patterson, 183. I think he's a decent enough running back 3 for you, but there's risk there. I think Cordero Patterson could get his job taken by Tyler Algier, or he could break down and wear down. And that's so sad, but because Cordero Patterson, he finally has a big role on a team, and it's on a loser team like Atlanta, at least for 2022. That will do it for today's podcast. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you do. Go to youtube.com and search Best Bell Fantasy. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. Make sure you are also listening on the audio. I've tuned that up a little bit. Give it 5 stars so that my wife gives the thumbs up. And I love seeing those 5 stars next to the podcast. It allows me to do this for free. Later on this week, I'll be doing more of these projection study halls and also talking about some other positional rankings. I'll be doing a live draft later on this week as well. In the meantime, thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate you listening, and good luck in the best ball streets.